All right, let's continue going through this $5 or big $5 win for CzechRaizor. If you enjoy this type of content, check out pokercoaching.com. There we have interactive hand quizzes similar to this, where I will present you a situation and then ask you what you should do. You'll then click a button that says either, like fold, call, re-raise, or re-raise all in, something like that. And then I will give you a score for that answer. And then I'll analyze all the options and tell you which one I like and why. So if you are into that kind of thing, check out pokercoaching.com.
Let's move on to the next one. With 60k small blinds are 6 and 200. So I got 50 bigs, Jack 10 off. Again, this is very iffy spot. I'm here to invest just 600 into 5.5k pot, which is a great price. This guy can spoil my plans and shove. Virtually no sample and 14.0. It should be passive, but the sample is very, very small, so I do not know. Yeah, it's interesting. I decided to complete for 600, which is 1% of my stack. So it's, if I had like 26 bigs, I would never complete here, but given the stack size, I decided to go for it and just see the flop for 600. And yeah, I really would like to know if it's good.
So we mentioned this concept earlier in one of the previous episodes or previous parts of this review, where I said that you seem to not be inclined to splash around a bit and see cheap flops. And this is something that I'm calling in this spot every time. If I have 10 big blinds, I'm calling in this spot. And that's just because we're getting such amazing pot odds and our hand is going to play well enough. We are going to get shoved on sometimes by the big blind. When that happens, if the initial raiser folds and this guy folds, we can easily call. If this guy shoves, this guy calls, this guy folds, we can easily fold. So we have very clean decisions if we do elect to call. And our hand's okay. It's not like we have garbage. A Jack 10 offsuit's an acceptable hand, especially against limpers who knows what they're in here with. So I'm calling this very, very, very frequently. I'm trying to think. If I have like 5 big blinds, am I going to call? Like, probably. So yeah, I'm just calling with this pretty much every time. The pot odds are irresistible to me.
All right. Obviously, flop well, and the board is drawy. And there's a possible straight draw and a flush draw. And I should start value betting and protecting my hand. Because the limpers are passive. I do not see them stabbing the flop too light or too often, and it would be a disaster being left with just PSR1 with the short stack. And if the turn's like a king and he decides to jam and these two fold, I would be left in a very, very tricky spot. So for this reason, just for sole purpose of getting value and protection on my hand, I decided to lead out, which could create some tricky decisions, some tricky spots once I get raised. I think I'm pretty much done with the hand. There are quite a few bad turn cards that I will be check folding on. So it's not very easy, but I see it as a best play at this point.
So
protection and avoid.
You mentioned here that you like leading, and I'm actually not opposed to leading in this scenario, mainly because it's very easy for it to go check, 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 and then the turn card comes and it is not favorable for you. There should be a lot of unfavorable turn cards for you. So in this scenario, I like leading. If this was a raised pot, I would definitely check. Of course, you would not be in here if it was a raised pot, but imagine much deeper stacks facing a min raise or something. Maybe you do peel. So yeah, I think that I'm leading here in this limp pot a lot of the time. I think checking's also fine, but with these stack sizes, I do prefer lead. The one benefit of checking is if you face a bet and a call, you can often fold then and get off the hook for almost free. But yeah, just bet. Bet's fine. I would probably bet a little bit bigger because again, we are trying to get value / protection. I think you may need to go like 3,400, but I don't think that's that big of a deal.
Tricky spots on some of the cards. This is very clear. Just put the rest in. Let's just put the rest in.
Here's a spot where you should put the rest in, because now, as opposed to the previous hand where you had the full house and the previous episode, keep saying episode, previous part, whatever you want to call it, This is a spot where if your opponent has equity, you don't care if he folds. And if he has a made hand, he's never going to fold. So this is a spot where you should be shoving the turn. When you had pocket jacks on the jack 5, 2, 5, or whatever it was, your opponent has no equity. So you really don't want to let your opponent fold. But here, if your opponent folds, that's fine because he always has equity.
See what happens. I got straight up value from 8x, which is nice. Okay, so last hand and wrap up. Let's wrap up this part 3.2. Once again, sorry for the technical difficulties. Midway through part 3. Alright.
Ignore what CzechRaizor is saying about part 3, etc., etc. We're on whatever part we're on now.
I'm not going to get involved facing this action.
Went raise 3-bet. You could 4-bet if you feel like it. I'm always fine. I'm always happy with the cold 4-bet. I think it's sweet, but not with 5-4 suited. Whenever you're cold 4-betting, you typically are not going to get called, so you usually want to have a blocker hand. And that usually means like ace, jack, or something like that. Just a solid blocker hand is a good hand to cold 4-bets.
I'll just skip into big pot that I played, and it's going to be a hand that I lost. Okay, no spoilers. Ace 9 off in on the button. Very, very standard, clear open. I get a flat from small blind from a guy that's 19, 12, 14, so that should be a very defined and relatively strong range. Queen jack suited, jack ten suited, king queen off, king jack suited. Yeah, but just basically suited broadways. Maybe pocket ace, pocket nines. I'm blocking nines, but I could have pocket sevens, eights, nines, because at this depth, not a good idea for him to 3-bet fold or 3-bet call.
Well, slow down. I don't really mind a 3-bet fold. Imagine he's sitting here with ace 2 offsuit. The only way you can possibly play that hand is to 3-bet it. And if he 3-bets to something like 10k or 12k, it puts you in a pretty rough spot. So I actually think he could be 3-betting here with the intention of folding. Let me just rewind this. I want to make sure I understood what you're saying.
I get a flat from small blind from a guy that's 19, 12, 14, so that should be a very defined and relatively strong range. Queen jack suited, jack ten suited, king queen off, king jack suited. Yeah, but just basically suited broadways. Maybe pocket ace, pocket nines. I'm blocking nines, but I could have pocket sevens, eights, nines, because at this depth, not a good idea for him to 3-bet fold or 3-bet call. Yeah.
I suppose you mean with exactly those hands like sevens, eights, nines, etc. Okay, that makes sense. I will agree with that a little bit more. And I do generally agree that his range should be a little bit more cleanly defined and that it's hands that are not quite good enough to 3-bet get in. So, for example, hands that are good enough to 3-bet get in include... Well, let's think about the hands you want to be flatting here. You can get it all in with these hands. No problem, right? So these are good enough to get in, perhaps. These are not good enough to call. This is not... these. So you're looking at something like this for a calling range, perhaps? Maybe something like this? So yeah, I think this is going to be roughly a calling range. Maybe you can take out some of the suited connectors in these hands. Maybe you should be adding in more hands like this. Maybe some people are calling these hands. But yeah, I think he could be easily 3-betting stuff like king jack, queen jack, ace 10, ace 9, ace x suiteds as bluffs, if he feels like it.
Ace jack. At this point, I think he's got more aces that dominate me than I dominate, so he's got some better aces and not too many worse aces. So I should be definitely very cautious about this pre-flop flat.
That's exactly what I was showing here.
Big blind does, and he completes as well. He calls as well, so we are going to be 3-way to the flop.
Big blind's range should be very wide.
At this point, I think that into 2 ranges I should have check folded. I would, looking at this spot right now, I would just check behind. Yeah, because it is a flop that hits the big blinds range quite a lot. He's got hands like 10-9, 7-8, 6-7, 8-9, just plenty of hands that hit this board, even like 6-5, maybe 4-5 suited. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. I would just give up on this board. It's too likely one of these two players has you beat, and sometimes when it checks down, you win, or it goes check, 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 and you improve on the turn. So I would just check this.
Okay, I like checking behind.
Oh, hello.
At this stage, value betting seems pretty reasonable, because I can get value out of 10x that check the flop. Big blind could have some weaker aces, ace 5, ace 5, 32, 6, 8, 9. So, yep, And once I get called by small blind, I should expect him to have stronger range or stronger aces, so then I should be threading the river very carefully and approaching the river carefully. It's not necessarily what I did, but this is what I would do, looking back at this hand. And I get raised, so...
Okay, so let's just rewind this just a second. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so raise pre-flop, check, check, check. Sorry for being scatterbrained. Here we are on the turn. We bet and get bet small, which I like, and then we get raised. Wow. Well, if this is his range, he's probably only check raising the aces. But even then, check raising aces here is not a very good strategy because he's gonna make you fold out a bunch of stuff. I mean, I think you just have to fold here. I hate this, but I think you have to fold. I'd like your turn bet for value. Maybe you should just check. I think checking would be fine. This is a hand that has a tough time getting value from worse hands. You're more so protection betting. So, that has some merit. But I think you got to fold.
And I get raised. So I don't think he's messing around here three-way, given this action. Even though I'm kind of capped, my range is capped. That means that I have just a one pair hand, which is ace X very, very often. And I could even be betting like king, jack, and queen on the turn, which is not necessarily the best thing to do, but he might think that I would be doing that. So yeah, if he's really, really good and my hand looks face up, he could take advantage and exploit me this way. I do not think this is the case, or it is the case in this spot, but it could happen, and no, I think that I should just fold here, but wonder what you think.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, so let's finish off here and wrap up the part of 3.2.
I hope you folded. We don't know if you folded. Yeah, this is a scenario where I think you just have to fold. It's reluctant. You're unhappy about this spot. But what you going to do? All right, let's go ahead and continue moving forward.
Well, we are going to peek under the bed and find some monsters with this hand, because I just assumed that this hand would be over while once facing the raise on the turn. This cannot be further from the truth, unfortunately. So let's see what happens. I made correct assumptions about my opponent range pre-flop, and him being quite defined and stronger, and having stronger range than my range is. Once he decided to go along and defend from small blind, go from small blind guy, that's 19-12. So we go to the turn, to the flop that, go and check, 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 and I decided to value bet ace, with reasoning of getting paid by 10x, maybe some 8-9, maybe 7x, and this guy, I could imagine this guy having weak aces like ace deuce, ace 3, 6, 8, and ace 5. So this is the reason I think I chose to value bet quite correctly. With this sizing, and then this happened. I faced raise from this guy, and I remember myself leveling, and I started to level myself unnecessarily to the point where I just did not see him having too many combos. He's repping very narrow. He's not repping too many combinations of hands, because he does not have 10-4, he does not have any 10-7, he doesn't have any 7-4, he should not even have like ace 4, maybe ace 4 suited, but not even that. He might even fold pocket 4s pre-flop, so I just started leveling myself that he's only repping ace 10 and pocket 7s, and that's really narrow, and he can see me capped in this spot once I check behind the turn and bet the river, once I check behind the flop and bet the turn, that my hand is what it is, and it looks like what it is, and he might be abusing this fact, but it's, I don't know, it's kind of a wishful thinking, I guess. And once I asked a friend of mine who plays high stakes, what is the difference between $10-20 average reg and high stakes, really top reg and top player, and the answer was shockingly or surprisingly simple. The answer was that these guys just keep things very simple, do not level themselves unnecessarily in such sports. That doesn't mean they would not make any, or run any bluffs, or do any barreling, or play any aggressive plays or aggressive sports, but just keeping things straightforward. These opponents that are straightforward is the best way, and for this reason it's simply a very good idea to review hand histories for just to discover what could happen. Another good news is that you can make such a play and still win a tournament. But overall, I'm kind of surprised that to discover this monster. Right, so I flatted, called.
So interesting. Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of leveling yourself is an interesting thing. I feel like I'm pretty good at just looking at my range and trying to figure out where it is in my range and going from there. And you just have to recognize here that this is not exactly the top of your range. I mean, it's a little bit unfortunate that you're betting this hand and folding it, but I think it's okay. But yeah, try to not level yourself. In this spot, I would just fold the turn. The guy probably has it. Looking at his stats, looking at how he's playing, what are you going to do? Also, the big $5 game, you have to realize any of the tournaments that are called big on PokerStars, they often have a much larger field than the standard $5 tournament or the standard $100 tournament or whatever. So often these games play like much lower buy-in games. So that is definitely worth mentioning.
The raise.
Yeah, fold to the raise.
Essentially a break unless I raised 6-5 or maybe ace-3. But this card should not change much. And I remember, now I do remember facing half board that I kept leveling myself that should he have set or ace-10, he would probably gone for larger sizing to get max value, because at this point I should have ace at least, at least an ace, so he should have gone for larger sizing to get max value, and it is just a train wreck of a hand, really badly played. That's basically for all the reasons that I mentioned when assessing my opponent's preferred range.
Notice that ace-10 offsuit, hopefully I still have it, is, I said he could have these hands initially. I kind of discounted them, but as you see, ace-10 offsuit is right in there, and you nailed your opponent's pre-flop range pretty well. So you assess the scenario right, or at least after the fact, on the turn, but then you did not follow through with it. So you have to be disciplined in that scenario.
Well, it's good to see that you can deviate from very basic plan and start leveling yourself and do such a terrible play. Another one is another pot where we paved this 5-8 off, and so this would not be my standard defense. I wonder if I was still steaming from that spot, steaming from that ace-9 off hand, because my minimum requirement for defending will be 8-6 off and 5-8 suited, 6-7 off, 8-7 off, 8-5 suited, 7-5 suited. So it is slightly behind my default defending range here. Anyway, I decided to call, and we are to the flop, which is 50.
I think defending here is okay. This is a pretty awful hand, but facing a button raise, I think it's okay. One thing worth mentioning here is the button's stats are pretty loose, or pretty tight, so you should not be too incredibly loose. So maybe this is still just a fold, but whatever.
5-9 rainbow. It is a flop where I'm very likely to be ahead, and I think it is a flop that he would be c-betting a decent amount, especially he's got hands like ace-2, ace-4, and he could have 7-8 and some gachos. Maybe he decides to c-bet with queen jack, jack 10 and that type of hands as well, because he should not expect me to hit this flop very hard. I could have some 9x, like 9-7 suited, 9-8 off, 9-10, jack 9 suited, and so on. So there are some 9s, but overall it is not a flop to be hit the hardest from my BB defending range. Let's see what happened. I checked, and my opponent, okay, I'm skipping ahead here, so he was on a wiki side just over a third of a pot, and now that I see that I raised in this spot, I'm thinking that I'm ahead of a very large part of his range, and I thought it would be a good idea to get protection to raise for value / protection, because I did not assume, I was not too worried about getting 3-bet bluffed, and there are not any flush draws or legitimate straight draws, so I'm not too worried that he would 3-bet or shove with a draw, and I would have to fold in a situation where I'm ahead, but flipping with a draw. So given these reasons, I decided to get some protection, and believing I had a best hand, I just raised to take it down on the flop, take this down on the flop, which happened.
So middle pair bad kicker and bottom pair good kicker, bottom pair bad kicker, etc. Those are hands that I think are fine to check raise. I think on a board this dry, I think you may be better off check calling, especially against a very tight player. Notice this guy just is not that aggressive. Let me see what this last number is on your heads up display. Total open limp. Okay, that doesn't tell us anything. We want to look, or no, well, whatever. The total hands So the flop continuation bet is 67%. So what this kind of implies is this guy's checking behind with a lot of marginal made hands sometimes. I mean, again, we don't know because we can't delve too deep into the stat, but he's checking sometimes. So if he's checking sometimes, that kind of implies he's checking with his marginal stuff if he's anywhere near good. Given his tight preflop stats, he probably is somewhere near good. So against this guy, I think you're better off check calling, because if you check raise, your opponent's only going to continue that range that you lose to, or mostly the range that you lose to. Maybe ace 4 and ace 2 come along, but that's about it. So I think in this spot, you're going to be better off check calling with the intention of check calling and or check folding the turn, depending on what comes. So I think I'd probably check call this one. I think this hand's probably good enough to check call. I probably would be check calling any pair here. The problem with check raising this from a balance point of view is that if we get action, we are in pretty bad shape. And you really don't want to take a hand that is doing great versus a flop check calling range. Or if you're doing great if you check call the flop, you probably have 60% equity or more. But if you check raise and get called, you often have like 25% equity. So you really don't want to take too many hands like this that are okay if you check call and then turn them into a low equity hand when you get called if you check raised. Obviously, you clean up your equity, so you just don't lose the 25% of the time when your opponent outdraws you. That does happen whenever you check call the flop, but I think this one's probably good enough to check call. And, I'm not going to harp on it too much. Check raising in these spots is fine sometimes. I like the smaller sizing because it gives you a nice price. But just be aware that check raising is not the only way to play these hands.